نتمشى مع براين لك يلا تمشى مع براين لكو نتمشى مع براين. العوافي يا جماعة, and welcome to another episode of نتمشى مع براين. I know I've been away for a couple of weeks, but that's, as I said, is just life being life, and didn't have the time to generally be able to prepare and set up a new episode for you guys. But we're back now, and that's the important thing. And today, as usual, I'm on a walk here in Auburn in Sydney. It's a nice day, warm day in this cold winter, and it's a very nice afternoon for a walk. And as we usually do بكل حلقة نحن بنبلش الحلقة تبعنا بنكتة بايخة. And because of the subject of today's podcast يلي هو being bilingual, we're gonna say a joke in Arabic, a joke in English, and a joke that mixes both in a very smart way. So let's start off أول شي بالنكتة البايخة اللي بالعربي. في مرة واحد لبس كلسات خضر, قام خضر لبس له كلساته, which is also a nice play on words. And then as for the dad joke, or the نكتة بايخة بالإنجليزي, why don't eggs tell jokes? Because they might crack up. which also embodies the idea of a dad joke. Very well put. Well, I think النكتة البايخة أول شيء بيطلع لها maybe a 6 out of 10 على البياخة scale, لأنه كيف فيها تكون أبيخ. The dad joke probably hits a 5 out of 10. And now for the joke that mixes both, which is, why did the letter wow take a nap? Because it was afternoon. This one is, you need a proper understanding of both the English and Arabic language and the alphabet and how they're placed, because wow usually comes after noon, the letter noon, so the letter wow comes after the letter noon. And I think me explaining a joke is the worst way for a joke to land, but it's in the theme of today's episode, and so we will go with it. And as I said at the beginning of this episode today, our topic is being bilingual. So I think my ability, or me being bilingual, is a cornerstone of this podcast. The ability to switch between Arabic and English وأحكي معكم باللغتين, لأنه بهيدي الطريقة نحن نقدر نتواصل على مبدئين وعلى طريقين يلي هن both English والعربي, and the ability to switch between both. And I wanted to talk about that, about being bilingual, and how I became bilingual, and how it represents me, it represents my culture, and the significance of being bilingual itself. So I speak both Arabic and English very fluently. وفيني نقل بيناتهم in a very seamless way, which بتساعد with your communication, also helps with your brain development and everything like that, and we'll get into it deeper. But how I became bilingual is because I think mainly my parents and their influence. So as some of you might know, in this podcast, I've brought on both my mom and my dad. And my mom grew up here in Australia, always speaking in English, and that was her primary language. And she learned Arabic way more when we moved to Lebanon because of the need to use it. Meanwhile, my dad is the complete opposite. He grew up learning Arabic and speaking in Arabic, and then learned English when he came here in order to use it as a form of communication. And that's where my exposure came in. So, for the majority of my childhood, I grew up in Lebanon. So, Arabic was the dominant language, the language that everyone speaks, the language that I communicate with all of my family there, and how I just get around basically. And then my exposure to English was through my mother, who constantly used to speak English to us at home, um, but also through my education. So my school used to teach Arabic and English, and therefore we used to learn subjects in both languages and get exposed to both of those languages, and that kind of helped me grow my English as well. But then also, I think the exposure comes from a lot of the movies and shows that we used to watch as kids, which were mainly English movies. So, like all the Disney movies we used to watch growing up, all the shows we used to watch, they were all in English. So, that also provided that exposure to that language. Meanwhile, the community around me was providing the exposure for the Arabic language. But also, one of the things that helped with that exposure is that Lebanon itself is considered today not even just a bilingual country, but it's considered a trilingual country. So بلبنان بيحكوا Arabic, English, and French. And Arabic, it's spoken in Lebanon because it's the common tongue. English, because of its international exposure, just to all of these businesses and all of these communications around the world. And then French was introduced into the Lebanese people via the colonial entity that took over Lebanon during that period, which were the French. And the residue of that exposure and that influence is even till today. Like the Lebanese education system is based off an old French education system, which you have عندكم le brevet وعندكم الترمينال. These two official exams were actually French mandated exams, and that's how the exposure to those two languages came along with Arabic. And there's not a school in Lebanon today that doesn't teach using two languages at least. Like I had the privilege of just learning two, but most of the Lebanese people speak three. So I think being able to speak two languages is just insane. But then the ability to actually also be able to comprehend and speak a third is even more insane. And that's a lot of Lebanese people. Like my French is very basic. It's I don't think it's even spoken French. It's like barely understanding some of the words that are said in French. But for a lot of people in Lebanon, they speak and communicate very well in all three of those languages. And that's not something to be taken lightly. That's not something to be taken for granted, because the ability to communicate in three different languages is just an exceptional achievement. And you see the scale of it when you come to countries that don't have that exposure. Like a lot of people that I meet are very surprised at my ability to speak both Arabic and English. And for me, that's normal. For them, it's not, because this is not the norm for them. They know English here, for example, and that's their common tongue, that's their spoken language, and that's the language that they need. They don't need to speak another language. Meanwhile, for us, Arabic is the main language, but we need, or we choose, to learn those other two languages, whether you learn one or you learn them both, because of its ability to communicate with more people. And generally, just because English is a more internationally spoken language, it's just wherever you go, you can almost definitely find someone that will understand some form of English. Meanwhile, that's not the same case for Arabic, and it's not the same case for French. But the need to learn these languages to help us communicate on an international scale is what kind of influenced the Lebanese education itself. ومن وقتها صرنا نحن بالمدارس بيعلموا عربي انجليزي وفرنسي. وفيك يعني انا مثلا انا كان عندي التشويس انه نقي بين عربي وانجليزي سوري انجليزي وفرنسي، بس في مدارس بيجبروك على الثلاثه which is eventually something to the benefit of the person that's learning. Now, speaking of the benefits of being bilingual, the ability to learn or the capacity of learning more than one language has massive benefits. The first would be like cognitive benefits, like your ability to code switch and multitask, which is something اللي أنا عم بعمله هلا مبدئيا. يعني أنا عم بقدر أحكي معكم بالعربي وبعدين دغري immediately switch over to English and be able to speak in English as well. And that helps with your brain development because it helps you be able to smoothly and distinctly switch between شغلتين ما لهم علاقة ببعضهم يلي هن لغتين كليا مختلفين. And what I'm trying to do right now is show you an example of how switching between those two languages becomes seamless the more time you spend learning the other language. So كل ما أقضي وقت أنا عم بحكي بهول اللغتين اثنين بصير أنا عم بنمي جزء من راسي أو جزء من دماغي لحتى أتعلم أقدر أعمل multitasking. And this multitasking also helps in it translates to not just spoken word, but also translates to other activities. So the ability to do two things at once becomes way easier because of your capacity, because you expose yourself to that multitasking that usually happens when you're switching between both Arabic and English in my scenario. And then if you're doing it with three languages, including French, صارت قصة تاني كليا كمان. يعني انت عم بتزيد الكابابيلتي اللي فيه يشتغل فيها دماغك انت. But also it helps your brain develop faster, and it helps, I've read that it helps with your creative capacity, because ultimately, if the best way I can put this is that if you want to draw and you draw in one color, you're drawing in red, you can get so many beautiful things out of red. But if you learn to draw in blue as well and are capable of drawing in blue as well as you do in red, then all of a sudden you have the capacity to draw in blue, you have the capacity to draw in red, and you have the capacity to draw in the middle and combine the two. يلي هو عم بيصير هلا مبدئيا لما انا عم بحكي معكم بالانجلش وبالعربي. So the ability to learn a second language is a privilege and it's an advantage, and it's something that benefits you greatly, which is why I always encourage people to learn other languages or to at least start in learning some form of language. And also, لما I use the analogy of the blue and the red colors, that's also one of the advantages of في شباب هلا قاعدين انتبهوا انه انا عم بسجل شيء وبلشوا يعيطوا. So also when you learn two languages, you're expanding your ability to communicate, because you're communicating in more than one language, you're communicating in more than one vocabulary. You're expanding your vocabulary to be able to speak both. In like for example in my situation, أنا الفوكابولري تبعي بيمشي بين العربي والإنجليزي. So أنا فيني أعبر بطريقة واحدة يلي هي العربي وأعبر بطريقة تانية يلي هي الإنجليزي. لأنه each language has its advantage, and each language has its own vocabulary, and each language has its own ability to express emotion. So, like I said, instead of drawing with one color, now you're drawing with two. And the ability to draw with two allows you to also merge the two. And therefore, the way you express yourself can be depicted in two different colors and can be depicted in both Arabic and in English. وساعتها أنت بتصير تقدر تستعمل and to take advantage of the beautiful aspects of both of those languages, sorry. So there's some words that are expressed in Arabic so beautifully that are not expressed the same way in English. وبنفس الوقت في كلمات بالإنجليزي موجودة ما بتقدر يتعبر عليها مزبوط نفس الشيء بالعربي. So أنت when you're learning both of those languages, you're allowing yourself to expand your vocabulary and to expand your ability to express what you're thinking, what you're feeling, and what messages you're trying to convey. And that's all in you because you're learning not only to draw in blue, but you're drawing in blue, in red, and you're drawing in between. But there's also like the advantage of learning two languages doesn't mean that you just get the advantage of speaking in both of those languages. You get the advantage of reading in both of those languages. You get the advantage of writing in both of those languages. And you get the advantage of listening to music in both of those languages, reading poetry in both of those languages. So understanding these two languages doesn't just stop at communication. It expands further. You expose yourself to two different worlds of art in terms of literal art. So you can read more, you expand what you can read. You can read Arabic. The simplest example of a great book in Arabic is ألف ليلة وليلة يلي هو كتاب كتير حلو. And it's the basis of the story of Aladdin. At the same time, you can read English. Like there's so many books in English that you can read. There's Harry Potter, there's Lord of the Rings, and that's just to mention some of the mundane few ones that are there. Also, at the same time, it's music. So you can listen to Michael Jackson and be amazed by Michael Jackson, but also at the same time, you can listen to زياد رحباني وتطلع على الأغاني والموسيقى اللي بيطلعها زياد رحباني واللي بتطلعها فيروز اللي هي موسيقى رائعة. So the advantage of learning these two languages doesn't stop with just communicating. It expands more, and therefore you expose yourself to more aspects of the world and to more beauty that comes out of the world, because not all great musicians sing in English and not all great writers write in Arabic. So انت بس تتعلم اللغتين وتحط على حالك انه انا بدي اتعلم هول اللغتين بتزيد المعلومات اللي انت فيك تتعلمها, and the exposure you get from all of that new information comes along with those two languages. And also there's things that are just great, like we started this episode saying two separate lame jokes, one in English, one in Arabic. They're both lame, but because of my ability to speak those two languages, I was able to understand both of those lame jokes and to translate them, and that itself is something. See, that was a junction between both of those languages. It allows you to expose yourself to something beautiful, and the ability to understand both of those written word and poetic instances and musical melodies. But beyond the advantages of what you get from just learning two languages, there's a different aspect to learning two languages. So my form of bilingualism is not, oh, I speak English on a day-to-day basis and I learned Spanish because I went to a trip. I was going on a trip to Spain once. My exposure to these two languages was life. So the way I learned Arabic was because I needed to use it daily to communicate بالعربي واحكي مع العالم. So Arabic itself was not something that I learned and forgot, but something that I learned and I use on a daily basis. At home we speak in Arabic. دايما كل وقت نحن بنكون بالبيت عم نحكي مع بعضنا بالعربي. بس بنفس الوقت كمان نحن لما نكون بالبيت بنضلنا نحكي English. And I use English on a day-to-day basis as well because that's how I communicate with everyone at work. And that's how my professional life goes here in Australia. And so the form of bilingualism here is not just learning a language for the sake of learning a language, but it's learning a language out of a necessity to be able to communicate. And that's my exposure to those two languages. Arabic to communicate with my family, with my friends, with my dear ones, and English, which also I use to communicate with my family as well. But mainly I use that to communicate with my professional world, with people at work, people here in Australia in general, people who aren't Lebanese. Anyone who's not Lebanese, I have to communicate with them via English. And when I'm in a country that speaks majority English, then English needs to become a secondary or a important, I won't say primary, because the primary language for me is always Arabic. But it becomes a very important aspect that you need to add into your life because it allows me to communicate with everyone there in a way better way. That sounds redundant, but it works. And because I needed to use both of those languages, and each one for a different instance, I feel that each language of, or me speaking in each one of those languages represents a different part of Brian. And it almost feels like I have two personalities. One personality that pops up when I'm speaking in Arabic, and another completely different personality that pops up when I'm speaking in English. Like a lot of people at work or a lot of people that I meet, they always ask me this question, is like, what language do you think in? And I don't have an answer to that because it's not like, oh, I just think in English or I just think in Arabic. It's based on the instance that I'm in. If the environment that I'm in is an Arabic dominant one, then my thinking is going to be in Arabic. And if it's an English related issue or an English related atmosphere, then my thinking is going to be in English. And like I said, each one of them represents a very different side. Because, for example, in languages as well, there's dialects. And each dialect is usually influenced by the environment you're in, the village you grew up in, or whatever it is. So my Arabic أو العربي اللي أنا بحكي فيها هي عربي بدك تقول نوعا ما مثل جاي من خليط من محل ما أنا كنت بلبنان. يعني أنا أول ما نزلت على لبنان قعدنا بالمنيا بمركبتها عند بيت جدة، وبعدين نقلت على طرابلس، بعدين قعدت بالكورة. And so العربي اللي بحكي فيها أنا هي خليط بين هول المناطق اللي كنت فيها، واللهجة بتيجي من هيدي المنطقة اللي موجودة فوق هونيك. Meanwhile, English for me, and the reason why it has a tint of an American accent, is because of the way I was exposed to English when I was a kid. So through my school and my university were both American based in some way or another. So the way that language was exposed to me was in an American format. And even, like I said, the music I used to listen to or the movies I used to watch were all generally in an American format. And therefore, that's why my English has that American tint. So it's the language I learned was not only just learning a language, but it was also accompanied with a dialect that was unique to each of those situations. So the dialect for me in Arabic arises from where I grew up and spent most of my time speaking Arabic, and then English was just due to the exposure of of that language. And each one of those languages for me comes with its own set of memories, it comes with its own set of experiences, and they shaped and formed that Arabic or that English. So the experiences that I went through in Lebanon speaking Arabic خلوني أنا أصير أحكي عربي بهيدي الطريقة، لأنه اللي بيعرف عربي أو اللي مثلا ربيان على العربي بيعرف إنه في طرق لتحكي فيها بالعربي وفي لهجات مثل ما بيقولوا، يعني هني dialects. وانا اللهجه اللي تعلمتها هي مبنيه على التجارب تبعي. التجارب تبعي اللي صارت انا ولما كنت صغير عم بكبر مع اولاد عمي، مع قرايبيني، مع رفقاتي، مع الجو اللي حوالي، مع اهل الضيعه، مع اهلي. سو هني اثروا على هيدي اللهجه اللي انا بحكي فيها، وهني ثبتوها. ولبل هني كمان خلقوا ذكريات بهيدي اللهجة. ومشان هيك أنا العربي اللي بحكي فيها اليوم هي بتجي من هاللهجة. و the same comes from English. So those beautiful movies that I used to watch as a kid that shaped who I am and kind of transformed me as well, they were all in American English, and therefore that's where that influence comes from. And so you have to acknowledge that for me personally, these languages were not taught because I wanted to, like, it wasn't like a Duolingo lesson. It wasn't me going on an app or reading a book or having a class and learning how to speak a different language. It was because of a necessity, and they were formed because of experiences and because of memories. And therefore, that's why they're just usually um, they're usually different. So having the necessity to learn these languages and the need changes how you interpret that language, changes how much you understand that language, and it forms the way it communicates with you. My personality as someone بس يكون عم بيحكي بالعربي كليا بحس حالي انسان غير لما اكون قاعد مثلا مع رفقاتي من الضاعة اللي هون باستراليا وقاعدين عم نحكي بالعربي. بحس حالي خلص انا رجعت على لبنان، انا رجعت صرت بالضيعة. انا فوق قاعد بالضيعة وعم بحكي هيك وهيك، بحكي مع الشباب لما نكون قاعدين نحن كلها سوا وعم نتحدث مع بعض. وبحس في إلها نوع من الحنية ولا نوع من ما بعرف الكلمة اللي بدها تطلع معي هلا، بس انه إلها نوع من الصلة وصل بيني وبين هالشباب اللي بكون قاعد معهم، او بس كون قاعد عم بحكي مع امي او مع اختي عم نحكي بهذا العربي. بيطلع نوع من براين جديد او غير بس يكون عم بيحكي عربي. And at the same بس كون when I'm speaking in English, I feel like I'm someone that's completely different, someone that's more, I think, more professional in terms of, that's why I use that language. I use that language in a professional manner, in a work instance, in a communication instance, and not a colloquial one like Arabic for that instance. And that's why I feel like my exposure to those two languages is different, and each one of those languages creates a different personality for Brian. So واحدة منهم عم بيحكي بالعربي وبالعامية كمان، مش عربي فصحى، مش the heavy Arabic dialect. And at the same time in English, that's a different personality. But also it's not Shakespearean English, for example, which I like to compare to عربي فصحى. يعني أنا بس حدا يسألني شو هي العربي الفصحى وكيف تحكي عربي الفصحى، بقول له تخيل أنت, instead of speaking normal English or like the English we communicate with on a day-to-day basis, you're speaking Shakespearean English, like where thou art, whatever, whatever. So that's kind of how the balance shifts for both of those languages. Simplest way to put it is that Fusha Arabi translates to Shakespearean English because it's very profound, it's very grammatical, and it's يعني العربي الفصحى كل فتحة وكل ضمة وكل كسرة بتغير المعنى، ما بس الجملة، الكلمة كلها، ما بس الكلمة، الجملة كلها بتتغير من ورا بس تحريكة بسيطة. And it's the same that applies for English, for Shakespearean English. And I think also the reason why these two languages are so important to me, or they've grown so profound and they create these two personalities in me, which I'm not saying that they collide. It's not like schizophrenia where I've got two different people living inside of me. It's just that I feel like a different side of me is communicating in each one of those languages. But also at the same time, this ability to speak both of those languages in this instance and to code switch, انه وكود switch, when I say code switching هو انه انا اقدر افصل بين العربي and English in the same sentence. And that way, I think that ability allowed me to increase my circle, my social setting. So my social setting is not just limited to people who speak Arabic, and at the same time, it's not just limited to people who speak English. It's a mix between both. And because I grew both of those languages and my ability to communicate in both of those languages, I was able to communicate with more people. So at the same time, the people that I can communicate could be from Lebanon, could be from Syria, could be from Jordan, could be from Egypt, from anywhere, because they all speak the Arabic language. And also at the same time, my ability to speak English allows me to communicate with people from Australia, people from the UK, people from Canada, from America, anywhere where English is a primary language, but even more because English itself is just such an international language. So my ability to communicate with more people, to expose myself to more people, and to connect with a lot more people is partly due to my ability to switch between both of those languages seamlessly. And I've had a lot of instances where friends come up to me and say, like, sometimes you're just speaking Arabic and you switch to English just like that. And it's not even something that I need to think about. And that's because, again, it wasn't that I learned this for a certain purpose. It's because the necessity was there for me to need each one of those languages and to need Arabic and to need English and to need to understand how to switch between both. And the best instance is when you have, and I have a lot of friends here and even in Lebanon who, as well, share the privilege of learning 2 or 3 languages. And therefore, we have that ability to code switch and talk about these multiple topics in both of those languages. So if it's something that I need to talk about and I can express solely in English, then I can communicate with that friend in English and he will understand what I'm saying. And then when the need for Arabic to be used as a mean of communication, I can immediately switch to that, and so can they. Because again, we're learning these languages because of a necessity, not because we want to learn another language. Like a lot of people tell me, like, oh yes, I'm also bilingual or trilingual. I've learned Italian and I've learned Mandarin or whatever. And that's great, that's amazing that you learn these languages. But the difference that I see is that I'm not learning Mandarin to be able to speak it when every once in a while when I go to China or if I meet someone that's from that area. But I'm learning these, or the way I learned these languages is because of a necessity to be able to communicate with the people in my life on a day-to-day basis. So that's Arabic and that's English. Arabic for home, for people who are close to me, people who are dear to me, people who share the same ethnic background that I do, and English for more of that professional setting when I'm at work or لما بكون أنا قاعد بين عالم عم بشتغل معهم وبدنا نحكي that's the way I can communicate with them. أنا إذا بدي أحكي معهم هول العالم بدي أحكي معهم بالإنجليزي لأنه ما فيني أحكي معهم بالعربي، ما حيفهموا علي عربي. بس بينما اذا كنت قاعد مع اولاد الضيعه مثلا قاعدين نحن جمعه، ما حاحكي معهم بالانجليزي، حاحكي معهم بالعربي، لانه انا وياهم ربيانين على فكره انه نحن نتواصل مع بعضنا بالعربي. And so, like I said, lots of advantages to speaking in 2 languages and 3 languages as well. If you have that privilege to be able to speak 3 of those languages, I congratulate you. Like even the way I'm talking about how seamlessly we connect, I can connect to a lot of people in Lebanon. They can connect all 3. So the most famous, the most famous Lebanese sentence is "Hi, kifak, ça va." So hi in English, kifak in Arabic, and ça va in French. So that embodies the ability of communication that Lebanese people have, the ability to seamlessly fuse and merge these languages. Because remember earlier in the podcast I said red, blue colors, and now you've added a green one. So your ability to speak in French, English, and Arabic, but also to speak the colors in between and to mix and match. And that is not something to be taken lightly. It's a very big task, but also at the same time it's something that reflects on you as a person and your ability to multitask. But also, the ability to speak multiple languages is not something new to us, Lebanese people, or to Syrian people, or to Jordanian people, or to Palestinian people, or anyone like that, because our region itself has always been exposed to multiple languages. So, if you've listened to some of the previous episodes that I've done on the podcast, I've talked about Tyre or Sidon and its historical influence. I've talked about the Phoenicians and how they were as a people. And through that delving into history and learning the history of our people, you start to understand how our exposure to multiple languages and multiple cultures came to exist in the first instance. And so we start off with the Phoenicians themselves. So the Phoenicians were some of the greatest tradesmen and sailors that the world had ever seen throughout its history. And being someone that trades and sails the waters, that means you're a civilization that's constantly exposing itself to different civilizations. And with these different civilizations come different languages. And for someone that needs to trade, you need to understand how to communicate. Because if you can't communicate, there's no point in trading, because they're not going to understand what you're trying to sell, and you're not going to be able to convey that. And so the need to learn other languages was always there with the civilization, the Phoenicians themselves. And having been exposed to so many cultures allowed us to, in turn, unconsciously learn all of these different languages. So during the period of the Phoenicians, they were exposed to Greek, they were exposed to, I don't know, so many different other languages. Like they communicated with the Greeks, they communicated with the pharaohs in Egypt, they communicated with all of these different people and all of these different languages. And so that itself is, I think, an indicator of why we as a people find it so easy and just not just easy, but so vital to learn so many languages, to be able to communicate in all of these languages, because I think it's a trait that was handed down to us by our ancestors. It's something that our ancestors did, and they fine-tuned, and they learned how to be able to communicate with multiple civilizations via the trading routes that they created as Phoenicians. And then that ability to understand and comprehend other languages and quickly learn them in a way to be able to use them to communicate, which comes so easy to us, I think it's because our great ancestors used to do this on a day-to-day basis, and therefore that ability in our brains was inherited because of that instance, because the Phoenicians used to trade so much, and because they were exposed to all of these languages, and because they had to learn all of these languages. صرنا نحن نخلق عنا هيدي القدرة لحتى نتعلم هاللغات الجديدة أو نقدر نتواصل بكذا لغة بهالسهولة، لأنه جدودنا كانوا يعملوا هيك. بس هي it doesn't stop there. يعني ما بتوقف هيدي القصة إنه بس لأنه الفينيقية هن كانوا يتعاملوا مع كل العالم. بس أنت إذا بتطلع على تاريخ المنطقة كلها، على تاريخ لبنان وسوريا والهلال الخصيب يلي كانوا يسموه وقتها، يلي هي كل البلاد الشام يلي موجودة هونيك، بس تطلع على تاريخ هيدي المنطقة، ما نحن هيدي المنطقة كمان قطع عليها كذا حضارة. يعني it wasn't just the Phoenicians that were there. The Phoenicians came, and then after them came so many more civilizations that influenced the region. They influenced in terms of history, they influenced in terms of art, in terms of music, in terms of everything, in terms of religion, but also and mainly they influenced in terms of language. So the region itself was exposed to so many different eras. Like we had the Romans, we had the Roman period, we had the Byzantine period, we had the Crusaders, we had the Mamluk period. All of these various people, all of these different civilizations left a thumbprint and left an influence on us as a people and on our ancestors. And with all of these civilizations came a different language, maybe not a different language, but a different dialect of that language. And that again translates to how it helped us be able to so easily code switch and learn two languages. Because if you're a people that's in this region and you're constantly this for 100 years you get this civilization, and then for another 100 years you get a completely different civilization, and so all of a sudden your need, it's a necessity for you to be able to communicate with all of those various civilizations, is to learn the languages and to learn their way of communication. And therefore I think that, like I said earlier, our ability to seamlessly learn and switch between languages as Lebanese people and as people of the Levant is a byproduct of our ancestral history and a byproduct of the history of the region itself. So multiple civilizations exposing themselves to us, and then also before that the Phoenicians themselves, and how they were a seafaring people and a trading people, and in order to be able to communicate with people from across the globe, you had to be able to learn their languages and to understand how to communicate with them. And unlike today, where English is almost, you can consider the internationally spoken language, because you can practically use it to communicate anywhere, because anyone understands a little bit of it just because of its exposure in movies and in music, and like I said, everything around the world. Like the biggest shows, the biggest movies, everything like that is all in English. So you can understand why English comes off as the most used language to communicate. And in Phoenicians' time, in the time of Phoenicians, sorry, there was no one dominant language. There were multiple languages, and you had to be able to learn them to communicate. And so I think our ability, like I said, is handed down to us by our ancestors' experiences. Them needing to learn how to communicate allowed them to find a way to easily understand these languages, to easily switch between them, and then that ability was handed down to us via genetics. And so we're able to communicate in multiple languages and to learn them and to code switch between them so fast, is mainly in due, or partly in due, to our ancestors and what they used to do before that. And so I think that's another profound link to why I can communicate so easily between both of those languages. So it's not just that my experiences helped me learn these two languages, but it's because my ancestors learned to communicate in multiple languages, and that ability was something that was handed down to me. And therefore that's why I can speak both Arabic and English, وأحكيهم طريقة seamless, where it just connects between both. But also, like I said previously in the episode, I think أحلى شغلة عندي إياها بإنه أنا أقدر أحكي اللغتين اللي هن العربي والإنجليزي، هي قدرتي على التواصل، وقدرتي لأنا أقدر أعبر عن حالي أحسن، وقدرتي لأنا أقدر أجمع حالي مع كذا إنسان، ما بس إنسان من لون واحد، ما بس إنسان يلي بيحكي إنجليزي، بل بيحكي عربي واللي بيحكي إنجليزي، والعالم اللي بتحكي إنجليزي وعربي وفرنسي بلبنان بيقدروا يتواصلوا مع 3 شعوب. وهيدي منو شيء لحتى نقدر نحن نستخف فيه، بل هيدا شيء نحن لازم نسعى كرماله ولازم نربيه فينا. يعني أنا بشجع كل مين موجود بأستراليا هون حاليا وبيقدر يحكي اللغتين، بس بتلاقي مثلا أولادهم بيحكوا إنجليش بس. لا، ما بيصير. نحن لازم نتعلم العربي، لازم نتعلم الإنجليزي، ولازم نعرف نقدر نتواصل بالاثنين. مثلا أنا بعطيكم إكزامبل، أنا بنت أختي لما أجت لهون بلشت تحكي إنجليش كتير، وبتحس العربي تبعها صار يضعف. My mom saw this and noticed it right away. And so what she did to counter that was that every time my niece كانت تكون عنا بالبيت ما بنحكي إلا عربي. إذا بتحكي إنجليزي نحن ما بنفهم إنجليزي، بس بنفهم عربي. So that is that same necessity that I was in Lebanon. I didn't speak English when I was in the village because no one would understand me, so I needed to communicate in Arabic. And here, her society around her needs her to speak in English so that she can communicate with them. But that doesn't mean that you neglect or forget the Arabic, because that's part of who we are. And that's the language that you're going to need to use to communicate with our family back home. And so you always need to find a way to be able to encourage the new generation to carry on with that same tradition that we have, which is the ability to communicate with two languages, because it's a reflection of who we are as a people. We're an international people. We're a people that are able to communicate with so many other civilizations from our ancestors even till today. And so that's something that I think is very vital that we keep alive with the new generation that's coming up. We need to teach them how to speak in two languages, how to express themselves in both of those languages, and how to fuse them together so that they are able to A, communicate better, and B, communicate with more people, and therefore have more influence on their environment. Because I can only imagine what it's like when I'm, for example, sitting with a friend of mine at work who also speaks Arabic, and we're speaking in Arabic, but the surrounding can't understand what we're saying. And I've been in instances where, for example, two people are speaking in Mandarin, and I don't understand what they're saying. And I would love to be able to communicate or to be able to join into that conversation. And so having the ability to learn both of those languages allows you to be, like I said, increase your circle, increase your social circle, and be able to communicate even more. ومع هيك يا جماعة بهيدي الحلقة الحلوة اليوم, which I genuinely like, this is a topic that for me is very important. كتير مهم نحن نضلنا عنا هيدي التقاليد انه نحن نتعلم كذا لغة ونقدر نتواصل بكذا لغة. وانا بشجع كل مين عم بيربي عائلة او عنده عائلة جديدة هلا, new kids, or even if their kids are old or older than infants, you can still teach them the importance of why we need to speak in two languages, why we need to learn our mother tongue, which is Arabic, but also why we need to learn English to communicate with the people here. And just keep that tradition alive, keep that part of our culture alive, because it's not just انا بحكي لغتين, بس انت عم تحكي لغتين لانه جدودك كانوا يحكوا لغتين, وكانوا يحكوا يمكن اكثر من لغتين كمان. مثل ما عم بقول لكم هلا انا بس بعرف لغتين, بس اكثريه العالم بلبنان بتحكي ثلاثه, بتحكي عربي وانجليزي وفرنسي. And so the ability to speak even three languages is something that's ingrained in our culture. This exposure to different cultures, this exposure to different languages is something that's ingrained into who we are as a people and what our history is. And we need to remember that, and we need to keep that alive. And so مع هيك يا جماعة, أنا أول شي بشكركم كلكم, وبشكر الكل يلي عم بيتسمع على البودكاست. Everyone that's encouraging me and everyone that's helped me along the way, I would like to thank you all. وهيك بنضلنا نحكي نحن بمواضيع حلوة, مواضيع مهمة, ومواضيع بتعني لنا نحن, ما بس كلبناني, بس كأسترالي وكإنسان. هي مواضيع إنسانية كمان. بقى خلينا نضلنا نتذكر حضارتنا ونتذكر نحن شو, ونضلنا نشد, ونضلنا ننمي هيدا الفكر اللي موجود عنا. ومع هيك يا جماعة أنا بقول لكم thank you for listening in and for joining me on today's walk, and I'll see you on the next one. ومع هيك نقول لكم وشكرا وهيك.